Chapter 50. Lightning and Landslides. What about Maberly? Simpson asked. Well, we won't do him any good if we're caught in a... Wright felt something hit the back of his shoe. He checked behind him. Oh crap. We've got to move now. Simpson and Parker turned and looked. A flash of lightning lit the hill at the back of the ledge. A small section of the steep part of the hill slipped about a foot. The three picked up their gear and headed away from the flow to the far side of the ledge. Simpson led the way, followed by Wright and then Parker. The forest rumbled. Parker heard a loud crack. He looked back up the side of the mountain. A larger section of it had started to slip. We need to get under the ledge now. Speed it up or we'll be buried, he shouted. Simpson needed to run to the far side of the ledge, down the side, and then under the ledge. She found the end of the ledge and started down. Wright was close behind her. He turned back to see more debris breaking loose. His foot landed on a loose, wet rock. He slipped and stumbled, bumping Simpson. He turned in time to see her fall hard on her back. She pushed hard. She pedaled her feet against the sliding rocks. She gained traction and stopped. The weight of Wright's backpack was pulling him down. He slipped it off and tossed it to the side. The rocks loosened again and Simpson began to slide again. Wright dove toward her, grabbing the top loop of her backpack with his right hand. They slid another 10 feet. He reached out with his left hand and latched onto a pine sapling. Their slide stopped. The sapling bent. His hand slipped. He grabbed tighter. The sapling's roots gave way and their slide continued. Wright saw a jagged rock jutting out of the ground. He hooked it with his hand. It bit into his skin. He grimaced and held tightly. He felt something fall on his face. A rope. Spread eagle, Parker had braced his hiking boots against 2 rocks. Grab it. Let go of the rock and grab it. Now grab the damn rope, Wright. Wright let go of the rock. He slid another few feet. He snatched the rope from his chest and quickly wrapped it around his hand. He stopped suddenly. His grip slipped on the backpack's loop. Parker yelled, "Hang on!" Lightning struck a nearby tree. When the blinding flash passed, Parker looked for Wright. He was gone. Wrapped around the rope were long bony fingers that led to a thin, sinewy arm. The head turned around to look at Parker. Parker's eyes bulged. It was the old shaman. The shaman bent his arm, turned on his side, and pulled one knee up and under him. He pushed hard. He pulled the other leg up. With both legs under him, he pushed himself to a crouched position. He took a small step. He pulled Simpson a few feet, gathered again, stepped, and moved a few more feet. Again and again he did this. When he was within arm's reach, Parker dropped the rope and grabbed the shaman's wrist. He pulled hard. The shaman pulled hard and braced his feet against a large, deeply embedded rock and pushed himself up next to Parker. Both of them pulled Simpson up next to them. The watery debris was flowing against their backs. They scrambled backwards. A sudden surge of the slide hit them. They pushed hard, scrambled faster until they were under the ledge of the outcropping on top of which they had been camped. A large flow spilled over the ledge, landed in front of them, and continued down the mountain. Parker looked toward the shaman. Another flash of lightning blinded him. Wright was back. The shaman was gone. Shit, that was close, Wright said. I guess I'm stronger than I thought I was. It's almost as if I were possessed. It kind of looked like it to me, Parker said with a slight smile. How's Simpson? Out cold. Looks like she owes me a big one. Wright smiled devilishly. I wouldn't count on it. Why not? Well, to begin with, you're not up to her standards. I thought we were friends. We are. I just have very low standards. Besides, you're not her type. I doubt that. No, really, you're not her type at the very basic level. Oh, you mean she's... Exactly. Well, then that was a waste of my energy. He smiled. It took another 5 minutes for the small landslide to turn to a trickle and finally stop. By that time, they were covered from head to toe in mud and debris. Simpson remained unconscious. Chapter 51. Mother Nature is a bitch. While the landslide had flowed past them, the rain was unrelenting. Parker looked up and declared, "Mother Nature is a bitch." As the last syllable left his lips, another deluge hit. Wonderful. It's not enough that she tries to drop part of the mountain on top of us. Now she wants to wash us down the mountain. Don't be a pussy. It's just rain. Take advantage of a free shower. Wright stuck his head out from under the ledge and was hit by some residual mud that had collected on the edge of the overhang. He jerked his head back and turned to Parker. A fresh wad of mud was clinging to his nose and mouth. He wiped his hand down his face, spit several times, and concurred, "Like you said, Mother Nature is a bitch." Parker agreed. "Yep, she's making that clear." "Aha," Wright replied. Present thoughts of Mabley had been washed away during the landslide. Parker slipped Simpson's backpack off her and placed it next to her. There was blood on his hand. He turned her on her side and found a split in her scalp. It wasn't too deep and only half an inch long, but it was bleeding enough to worry Parker. He opened his backpack and removed the first aid kit. "Damn lucky the first aid kit was in your backpack. By now mine has probably been deposited somewhere in downtown Tacoma." Under the conditions, it was impossible to do an adequate job tending to Simpson's wound. When he saw the butterfly sutures in the kit, he was relieved. If he could cut the hair close enough, he might be able to seal the cut. However, he feared that as soon as he let up the pressure, the bleeding would return. With the hair surrounding the cut in her scalp soaked with blood, he concluded that the sutures wouldn't stick. He had to get rid of the hair. While Wright prepared the sutures, Parker used the small pair of scissors from the first aid kit to cut the hair around the wound. He sopped up the blood with a gauze pad and applied 3 sutures. Between the blood and the residual hair, the sutures stuck poorly and only reduced the bleeding a little. So, he took a stack of gauze pads and the roll of gauze. He pressed the thick stack of gauze pads on the split and used part of the gauze roll to wrap it over the gauze pads and then tied it under her chin. It wasn't pretty, but it held. The bleeding didn't stop, but it had slowed significantly. With Mabley missing and Simpson bleeding and unconscious, the search for the murder site seemed like a petty concern in comparison. Could wait one more day. Parker told Wright to stay with Simpson while he stumbled down the mountain. Parker would be on the lookout for Mabley on the way down, but his priority was to call for help as soon as he was within cell phone range. The rain continued to punish the mountainside as Parker stepped into the muck. He had gone only 20 feet when he fell the first time. As he rose, he cursed the rain. Shortly, it slapped him back down again. He got back up, cursed louder, and inched his way down the slope, slipping on thinly covered rocks or struggling out of ankle-high mud. As he trudged his way down, he reached a highly proficient level of profanity. Chapter 52. Slippery when wet. An hour and too many falls later, Parker picked up a cell signal. A minute into the call, the signal dropped. He held the cell phone up as he wandered around looking for a connection. During a flash of lightning, he saw a tall, bare, large rock outcropping about 30 feet to his right. He immediately headed toward it, hoping that the height of the rock would allow him to receive a signal. What looked like an easy climb up the rock face from a distance proved, in the rain, to look treacherous when he stood next to it. As he contemplated walking away from the challenge, he remembered Simpson. He had no idea how seriously she was injured, but she had been knocked unconscious, and that worried him. He would give the climb a try. Continually slipping, he grappled with maintaining a foothold. There were few rough, protruding edges large enough to brace his boots against and even smaller ones for his hands. Only 5 minutes into the climb, the reasonable distance felt like the sheer face of El Capitan. 10 minutes and numerous slips later, he was pulling himself over the top. It had been worth the effort. He had a faint signal. He dialed 911, gave them the GPS coordinates from his phone, and told them the situation and about how far away from the coordinates Simpson and Wright were. He also told them that Mabley was missing. He informed them that he would be searching for him, and he would be turning his phone off because it was short on battery life. The relief he felt was enormous until he considered getting down from the rock. Looking down from the top, the distance grew rapidly. He scooted to the edge, rolled over on his belly, let his legs dangle over the edge, and pushed himself searching for a foothold. His foot located a small ledge. He put his weight on it and searched for a foothold for his other foot. He found one and shifted his weight. His foot slipped. He scrambled to find another foothold while he gripped the top of the rock. His fingers began to ache. His grip weakened. His feet slipped. First, the small finger of his left hand lost grip. Then rapidly another and another. He held on tighter with his right hand. His left foot slipped off. He could feel the surface of the rock bite through his coat and into his chest as he slid a few inches. His right foot slipped. His fingers gave out. Desperately grasping for foot and handholds, he slid down the face of the rock. He could feel the rock scraping the side of his face. His belt buckle kept twisting into his waist. He closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable. A second later, his feet jammed into the muddy ground and slipped from under him. His legs collapsed and he fell hard onto his back. A puff of air blew out of his lungs. His eyes sprung open. He laid there, his chest tightening, his breathing shallow, and the rain pelting his face. He needed to get up immediately. He had still not found Maberly. Regardless of how he felt, he had to find him, even if it meant crawling through the mud. He waited a minute for the pain to start. It seemed manageable. He gently rolled over, rose to his hands and knees, and slowly stood. His back hurt. He arched it backward and sucked in his abdomen. The pain lessened. Parker got his bearings. He hadn't seen Maberly on the way down the mountain, but in the rain and cloud-darkened morning, visibility was poor. The chances of finding Maberly were slim, but the man could have played it safe and just given Parker the map, but he didn't. The least Parker could do was look for him. He glanced uphill. He glanced downhill. It looked like sludge in all directions. He figured that Maberly, if he were unconscious, would be either swept down the mountain or buried under it. Parker had no idea if Maberly had gone to the left or right from the campsite. He was facing to the right, so his first tentative step was in that direction. His second step was not as careful. The third step laid him on his back. He slid down. His feet hit something solid and stopped his slide momentarily. It moved a few feet and stopped him again. He sat up. Lightning lit the sky in front of him. At his feet was a log, a foot in diameter and over 6 feet long. Nature had provided a foothold. In the distance, lightning flashed behind and to the left of him. It illuminated the log. A round boulder was at the end of the log. That's what stopped the log. Damn lucky for me. Another streak of lightning struck a few hundred feet behind him. The light sprayed through the forest, illuminating the log. Parker's eyes widened. Maberly? Damn. It wasn't a log and a boulder. It was Maberly's body and head. Parker knelt near his head and felt for a pulse. The lightning flashed again. It lit Maberly's head. A red, raw, quarter-inch wide cut split his neck open from jugular to jugular. His mouth was open. A slight pink tint bubbled as the rain filled his mouth and dribbled out. Chapter 53. Revelation. Gazing down at Maberly, Parker said, "Shit, Spooky must be here." Parker's head was now on a swivel. With each flash of lightning, distant and near, he checked the forest. He turned to the lightning to the left. He heard a laugh. A large shadow fell over him and vanished. He was hit with full force from his head to his toes. It laid him on his back. A puff of air burst from his lungs. Parker sat up quickly. He heard another laugh come from up the slope. Lightning struck and the thunder roared immediately. A silhouetted figure of a hooded man appeared. Whether it was an optical illusion or fear, he looked gigantic. Maybe it wasn't Spooky, not this big. The attacker bent, howled, and lurched down the slope with one hand held high. The hooded silhouette leaped and landed, knocking Parker on his back. The man dropped to his knees, straddling Parker. He jutted his face within a foot of Parker's. Lightning and thunder exploded again. The man's face lit. His black eyes were sunken deep into his face. Short parallel cuts spread across his face from just above his eyebrows to just below the eyes. It was Spooky. Parker muttered, "Spooky? Yes, it's time for you to die." Spooky raised his arm. At the end of it was a 9-inch knife. The knife shot toward Parker. Parker thrust his forearm up. The knife moved to the side and drove into his shoulder just under the clavicle. The penetration was shallow. Parker grabbed a handful of mud and rock and shoved it hard into those dark eyes. With the knife in his hand, Spooky rose to his feet, frantically trying to wipe the mud away. Parker sat up, balled his hand into a tight fist, pulled his arm back, and with all his might drove his fist into Spooky's groin. He pulled his hand back again as Spooky began to bend in pain. Parker drove his fist directly into the genitals. Spooky collapsed onto his side, bellowing. Parker struggled to his knees. He raised his fist high into the air and smashed it into Spooky's cheek. Spooky lay motionless. Parker struggled to his knees. He scooted around until he was next to the hooded Spooky. Parker reached over and pulled the hood off his head. Lightning struck again. The thunder roared. Uncontrollably, Parker's head jerked. His eyes widened and then fixed on that scarred face. He reached down, pushed on the face. The skin moved stiffly. It's a mask. He reached under the chin and pulled. The face lifted away. Parker jerked back again. Skinner! Parker stuck his fist through the neck of the mask and let the inside of the forehead rest on his fist. Gazing into eyeless holes, he held up Spooky's face in front of him. Lightning lit the hollow face, exaggerating the vacant eyes. Shit, this isn't a mask. This is a real face. He looked down at Skinner. You demented son of a bitch. For Parker, the terror that Spooky had spread throughout Seattle faded as Parker looked at the leathery, stretched, distorted, and scar-riddled face. A mask of terror, but only a mask, a place to hide. Then he looked down at Skinner and slowly stood. So, you're not really the infamous Spooky. Spooky hadn't come back. Skinner had sheared off his face and used it as a mask to resurrect the legend of Spooky. Skinner had become the second Spooky. You? A self-indulgent, narcissistic, drug-riddled piece of shit is the rebirth of the monstrous Spooky. Why? How? Did you kill the original Spooky, wait 6 years, cut off his face, and butcher those people? For what reason? For a story? Is that how you got your first story about Spooky? First-hand information? Did you know about him then and say nothing because you wanted a fucking story? Did your stories warp your mind? You're one sick puppy. He stripped out Skinner's belt, untied his shoes, took the laces out, and threw his shoes to the side. Then he unzipped Skinner's jeans and pulled them down around his ankles. He rolled him onto his belly, tied his hands behind his back with one shoelace, wrapped the belt around the crotch of the jeans, and pulled the end through the buckle. Then he took the second shoelace, looped the end through an eyelet in the belt, bent Skinner's knees, tied the other end of the shoelace to the lace that had been used to tie his hands behind his back, pulled tightly, and turned Skinner into a rocking chair. Parker turned his phone on. He couldn't get a signal, but climbing up that rock again was not going to happen. He turned his cell off. Chapter 54. Aberration and Abomination. It was an hour before the rain decreased to a drizzle. Skinner was still unconscious. Parker knew that Wright would worry and wonder if he had found Mabley and had arranged a rescue. But Parker was not about to leave Skinner alone. Letting Wright know what had transpired would not get the rescue team there any faster nor bring Mabley back to life. Ending Spooky's reign of terror was his #1 priority. This time Spooky was not getting away. Parker's satisfaction in capturing Spooky was tempered by the realization that the person who committed the latest horrendous murders had been in front of them all the time. It wasn't that it was completely impossible to imagine that Skinner could murder. He had a questionable character and an unsavory reputation to begin with. Skinner had been able to avoid detection because people had been openly discussing the case while he was around. Parker felt like someone had shoved a knife between his ribs and had been twisting it as Skinner laughed at all of them. Parker saw Skinner's head move, turn to the side and choke out a mouthful of mud. He coughed several times and blew a gust of air through his nose to clear it. He smiled a knowing, arrogant smile to inform Parker that Skinner knew something astounding that only he knew and that made him special. He dropped his face into the mud, gathered a mouthful, lifted his head and sprayed mud at Parker. Then he smiled smugly, rested the side of his head in the mud and closed his eyes. Parker shook his head in disbelief. You are definitely a deranged psychotic. But guess what? You have the right to remain silent. He then recited Skinner's Miranda rights and stared at him for a minute. While he knew Skinner had been a degenerate, imagining him as a ruthless mutilator and murderer was difficult. Before, at most, he had been a harmless annoyance. This smiling, happy, good-time Charlie, who for years had wandered the halls of the homicide division, was a homicidal deviant of the worst kind. At the heart of what he had done was biblical retribution, wrathful biblical vengeance. But Parker had never known Skinner to be religious. He certainly didn't act like a fire and brimstone Christian or, for that matter, any kind of Christian. But there was no denying that religion had played a part. The Latin Bible passages had made that clear. The mutilation and posing of Father O'Donovan had made that clear. The single word abomination had made that clear. What wasn't clear was what had caused the transformation. How does a man get to be this? What happened to turn him into this aberration? Or was there always a dark monster in there just waiting to be released, and the harsh, vengeful tenor of the Old Testament gave him a cause, a release, permission? During the several hours before Parker heard the rescue team, Skinner did not move at all, and Parker was not about to check to see if he was still breathing. If he had sucked in a lungful of mud, so be it. This man was dangerous, and a belt and shoelaces might not be enough to hold him. Parker needed the protection of distance. So, he kept his. When the Skamania search and rescue team finally found Parker, he asked about the condition of Agent Simpson, and they asked about the rocking chair man. They said that she was still unconscious, but that her vitals were strong. When she would regain consciousness was unknown. Parker said that the rocking chair man was an author and a vicious murderer. Parker showed them Maberly's body and told them that he had been dead for a while, and that the killer was the rocking chair man. They confirmed that Maberly was dead. They tended to Parker's wound. They prepared Maberly to be transported down the mountain. Parker asked for a roll of tape, which he used to wrap Skinner's wrists tightly and securely behind his back. Getting down the mountain was going to be treacherous, and the rescuers strongly suggested that Parker tie Skinner's hands in front of him. But Parker said, "Under no circumstances will I do it. If he falls 100 times, and looks like 180 pounds of raw hamburger, his hands will remain tied behind his back until he is behind bars." "That's just not right," a rescuer said, frowning. "If you had seen what he had done, you wouldn't say that. What he did to his victims is beyond anything that you can imagine. He brutalized them, and there is nothing that could happen to him going down the mountain that would equal a 20th of what he did." They continued to object, saying that what he was doing was inhuman. Parker's final response was direct and unambiguous. "You know, if you had seen his handiwork, you'd insist that we remove his hands completely and mail them finger by finger to the four corners of the earth. Only under those circumstances would you feel safe." The looks that Parker received varied from person to person. They ranged from a head-shaking frown to a barely perceptible laugh. Regardless, those hands remained tied behind his back. Skinner fell often and hard. By the time Parker and Skinner arrived at the rescue vehicles, Simpson was on her way to the hospital. Wright was huddled with his head down under a shiny mylar foil rescue blanket while sitting on the running board of a 4x4 Hummer. With his hand pressed on Skinner's back, Parker pushed him into the rescue camp and guided him to the foil-wrapped Wright. Parker moved in front of Skinner and tapped Wright on the head. "Look what I found in the forest." Wright glared at Parker, his voice filled with anger. "Why didn't you come back? Simpson could have died. I almost left her alone to get help." Parker stepped to the side, grabbed the shoulder of Skinner's hoodie, and pulled him forward. Wright looked and said nothing. Parker turned to Skinner. All he saw was a hooded, mud-packed face. Parker pulled the hood back and wiped the mud away. Wright looked baffled. "You know who this is, don't you?" "Of course. It's Ellie." Parker held his arm out in front of Wright. Covering his hand was the leathery, scarred, twisted, and deformed face of Spooky. Wright froze, fixed on the face of the most dangerous, monstrous man that Seattle had ever known. He was speechless. "Detective Wright, I'd like to introduce you to Spooky, or Rather, spooky the second. Parker held the mask next to Skinner's face. Skinner is spooky? Skinner smiled proudly. Yes, Parker replied. Not the original, a masked version. This is the face of the original. Parker looked at Spooky's face. Jesus, did he slice off Spooky's face? He must have. Can't get this at a Halloween store. What happened to Maberly? You're looking at his killer. Again, Skinner smiled proudly.